The sun blazed overhead, its relentless heat baking the construction site at London's Canary Wharf. Mark wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, his shirt clinging to his skin. Around him, the air was thick with dust kicked up by the constant digging, and the cacophony of machinery rattled in his ears. It was just another grueling day on the job, but Mark and his colleagues were determined to push through. They had a deadline to meet, and every second counted. Mark had been on site since 7 a.m., his boots already caked in mud as he worked alongside his team. Anthony, their team leader, paced the perimeter, shouting encouragement over the noise. "Keep it up, lads, we're almost there." His voice was barely audible over the roar of the excavators and the clanging of steel. The workers communicated in shouts and hand signals, their voices competing with the relentless din. Mark was used to it. Construction sites were never quiet. But then, something unusual cut through the noise. A sharp, high-pitched sound, almost like a whimper, pierced the air. Mark paused, his shovel hovering mid-air, and glanced around. The other workers seemed unfazed, their focus unwavering. Must be one of the machines acting up, he thought, brushing it off. But the sound came again, louder this time. Mark's head snapped up, and this time he wasn't the only one who heard it. Several workers stopped what they were doing, their eyes darting around in search of the source. The sound came a third time, unmistakably the cry of an animal in distress. Anthony raised his hand, signaling for everyone to stop. "Shut it down!" he barked. The machinery groaned to a halt, and an eerie silence fell over the site. The workers stood still, listening intently. Another whimper, faint but desperate, echoed through the air. "It's coming from over there!" Pedro, one of the younger workers, pointed toward the deep hole they had been digging. The team sprang into action, their exhaustion forgotten. They couldn't risk the animal, whatever it was, being injured by their equipment. Anthony took charge, his voice calm but firm. "We need to get it out, and fast. Mark, you're the smallest. Think you can get down there?" Mark nodded without hesitation. He tied a rope around his waist and the team anchored the other end, lowering him into the hole. The air grew cooler as Mark descended, the sunlight fading into shadow. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a thick layer of mud and debris. He moved carefully, his boots sinking into the muck. "Where are you?" he muttered, scanning the area. Then he saw it. A pair of bright, terrified eyes staring back at him from beneath the mud. "I've got it!" Mark shouted up to the team. He reached out, his hand sinking into the sludge as he gently lifted the small, trembling creature. It was completely covered in mud, its body limp and cold. "It's okay, little one," Mark whispered, trying to soothe the animal. "You're safe now." With the creature cradled in his arms, Mark signaled to be pulled up. The team worked together, hauling him and the animal out of the hole. As they emerged into the sunlight, the workers gathered around, their curiosity piqued. "What is it?" someone asked. The animal was so caked in mud that it was impossible to tell. Pedro grabbed a rag and gently wiped away some of the grime, revealing matted fur and a tiny, fragile body. "Looks like a puppy," Pedro said, his voice tinged with concern. "Can't be more than a few weeks old. How the hell did it end up down there?" Mark held the creature close, feeling its shallow breaths against his chest. "We need to get it to a vet," he said, looking to Anthony for approval. Anthony nodded. "Mark, Pedro, take it to the wildlife clinic. The rest of us will keep working. Let us know what happens." Without wasting another moment, Mark and Pedro bundled the animal in a spare jacket and climbed into Pedro's truck. The drive to the clinic was tense, the silence broken only by the occasional whimper from the mud-covered creature. Mark kept his hand on its tiny body, willing it to hold on. When they arrived at the clinic, the staff sprang into action. The receptionist gasped as they unwrapped the animal, its mud-caked form a pitiful sight. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Mark explained the situation as the veterinary team took the creature away for cleaning and examination. He and Pedro were led to the waiting room, where the minutes dragged by like hours. The quiet hum of the clinic was a stark contrast to the chaos of the construction site, but the anxiety was just as palpable. 2 hours later, a staff member approached them with a smile. "The vet is ready to see you now." Mark and Pedro followed her to the examination room, where Dr. Bailey, the veterinarian, greeted them warmly. "You boys did a good thing today," she said, her tone reassuring. "Let me show you what you've rescued." She gestured to the table, where the creature lay wrapped in a warm blanket. Mark's eyes widened as he took in the sight. Gone was the mud-covered lump they had brought in. In its place was a beautiful animal with light red fur, a streak of white running down its neck, and pointed ears that twitched curiously. Its bright, intelligent eyes scanned the room before settling on Mark and Pedro. "This," Dr. Bailey said with a smile, "is a red fox, about 4 months old by my estimate." Mark stared in disbelief. "A fox? How did it end up in the middle of Canary Wharf?" Dr. Bailey shrugged. "It's hard to say. My guess is it wandered in from the park nearby. Foxes are curious creatures, and this one must have gotten itself stuck in that hole. Lucky for it, you lot were around." She went on to explain that the fox was in surprisingly good health, considering its ordeal. Aside from being malnourished and dehydrated, it had no serious injuries. "We'll keep it here for a few days to make sure it's strong enough to return to the wild," she said. "When it's ready, we'll release it back into its natural habitat." Mark and Pedro left the clinic with a sense of relief and pride. They returned to the construction site and shared the news with the team, who were equally amazed. "A fox?" Anthony repeated, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see the day." A week later, Dr. Bailey called Mark to let him know the fox was ready to be released. Mark, Pedro, and Anthony made their way to the clinic, where they were greeted by the sight of the young fox, now healthy and full of energy. Its fur gleamed in the sunlight, and its tail wagged excitedly as it recognized its rescuers. "Looks like it remembers you," Dr. Bailey said with a laugh. The fox allowed the men to pet it, its trust in them evident. As they said their goodbyes, a wildlife expert loaded the fox into a van, ready to take it to a safe location for release. Mark watched the van drive away, a mix of emotions swirling in his chest. He was proud of what they had done, but he couldn't help wondering about the fox's future. Would it find its family? Would it stay out of trouble? He hoped so. As they returned to the construction site, Anthony clapped Mark on the shoulder. "You did good, mate. Not every day you get to save a life." Mark smiled, the memory of the fox's bright eyes lingering in his mind. It had been an extraordinary experience, one he wouldn't soon forget. And as he picked up his shovel and got back to work, he couldn't help but feel a little more connected to the world around him.